The crystal chandeliers cast their golden light across the medieval ballroom, like scattered stars brought down from heaven itself. Hundreds of wolves in human form moved beneath that celestial glow, their fine silks and velvets whispering secrets with every step, every turn, every calculated smile. The air hung thick with anticipation, perfume, and the barely concealed hunger for power that always accompanied gatherings of the packs. Tonight was a night of alliances, of careful political dances disguised as celebration, of ambitious families positioning their daughters like chess pieces before the most powerful unmated males in the realm. And at the center of it all, though she wished desperately to disappear into the shadows, stood Thessa Wolfscrest. 20 years old, and certain she did not belong here, Thessa moved through the grand entrance with steps so light they barely disturbed the air. Her skin was pale as moonlight on fresh snow, luminous in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. Her hair cascaded down her back in waves of pure white, each strand catching the candlelight and transforming it into something ethereal. The deep crimson of her dress stood in stark contrast to her coloring, a bold choice that her mother had insisted upon, though Thessa herself would have preferred something less conspicuous, something that would let her fade into the background where she felt safest. But there was no fading tonight. Eyes turned toward her as she entered, curious glances that slid across her unusual features before moving on to more conventional beauties. She could feel their assessments, their quiet judgments, the way they cataloged her differences and filed them away as oddities rather than assets. Beside her walked her sister, Kazira, and the contrast between them could not have been more pronounced. Where Thessa was pale and ethereal, Kazira was golden and commanding. Her blonde hair was styled in elaborate braids, woven with sapphires that matched her luxurious blue gown. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to be admired, her chin held high, her smile practiced and perfect. Since childhood, Kazira had occupied the center of every room, the sun around which lesser mortals orbited. She had grown accustomed to that position, had come to see it as her birthright, and she had long ago decided that Thessa's role was to be her shadow. They had barely taken 10 steps into the ballroom when Kazira leaned close, her voice honey-sweet, but laced with poison, a tone she had perfected over years of subtle cruelty disguised as sisterly concern. "They think you're ugly," Kazira whispered, her breath warm against Thessa's ear. "You know that, don't you? All these beautiful people, and you walk in looking like a ghost. You've always been just the shadow, little sister. Something to make me shine brighter by comparison." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of pain through Thessa's chest. She kept her expression neutral, had learned long ago not to give Kazira the satisfaction of visible wounds. But inside, something cracked a little more, another piece of her already fragile confidence crumbling away. She wanted to respond, wanted to defend herself, but what could she say? That Kazira was wrong? When she herself had always felt like the strange one, the different one, the one who never quite fit. So she said nothing. She simply clasped her hands together in front of her crimson dress and fixed her gaze on the far wall, trying to ignore the burning behind her eyes that threatened tears she would not shed. Not here. Not in front of all these people who already thought so little of her. What Thessa did not see, could not know as she struggled to maintain her composure, was that across that vast ballroom, beyond the dancing couples and the clustered groups of laughing nobles, someone else's eyes had found her. And unlike all the others who had glanced her way only to dismiss her, these eyes did not move on. Alpha King Barbarius Bloodfang stood at the far end of the hall, a mountain of a man whose mere presence seemed to command the space around him. He was tall, powerfully built, his broad shoulders and muscled frame speaking of countless battles won and enemies vanquished. His black hair fell past his shoulders in thick waves, and his beard was trimmed but full, giving him the appearance of some ancient warrior king from legends of old. His eyes were dark and penetrating, the kind of eyes that missed nothing, that could see through pretense and political masks to the truth beneath. For the past hour, he had been surrounded by ambitious families, their daughters presented to him like offerings to a god, each one more beautiful and more desperately eager than the last. They had smiled at him with carefully practiced expressions, had laughed at things he did not find funny, had touched his arm with calculated casualness. He had endured it all with the patience of someone long accustomed to being pursued for his power, rather than for himself. He had been moments away from leaving this entire charade behind, from returning to his chambers where at least the silence was honest, when the crowd had parted and he had seen her, the girl in the red dress with hair like starlight. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. In the pinned comment, you'll find a special selection of the best Amazon audiobooks that inspire our stories. If you purchase any audiobook through those links, you'll be directly supporting the channel and helping us create more stories. Tell us where you're watching from and how old you are in the comments. I hope you enjoy the story. Something in his chest had shifted at the sight of her. Something primal and undeniable that he could not name, but could not ignore. It was as if every instinct in his wolf had suddenly awakened from a long slumber, alert and focused with an intensity that bordered on painful. She was different from every other woman in this room, different in a way that had nothing to do with her unusual coloring and everything to do with the quality of her presence. Where the others pushed forward, she pulled back. Where they performed, she simply was. There was a vulnerability to her, yes, but also a quiet strength. A gentleness that seemed rare and precious in this harsh world of pack politics and power plays. He watched as another blonde woman beside her leaned close and whispered something. He saw the almost imperceptible flinch, the way the girl in red seemed to shrink into herself, her shoulders curving inward as if to protect something vital from attack. And something in him growled, low and dangerous, at whoever had put that look of pain on her face. Without conscious decision, Barbarius began moving through the crowd. People parted before him automatically, conversations halting mid-sentence as the Alpha King passed. He was aware of the sudden attention, could feel the weight of hundreds of curious stares following his progress across the ballroom. But he did not care. His focus had narrowed to a single point, to the young woman in crimson who still had not noticed his approach. He stopped before her, close enough that his shadow fell across both sisters. Thessa looked up, her eyes widening in shock as she realized who stood before her. They were remarkable eyes, Barbarius noted, a pale gray that seemed to hold entire winter storms within their depths. "Dance with me," he said. It was not a question, though his tone was not unkind. It was simply a statement of what he desired, what he expected to happen. For a moment, Thessa could only stare at him, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The Alpha King, the most powerful male in all the gathered packs, the subject of countless whispered conversations and ambitious schemes, was standing before her, asking her to dance. It seemed impossible, like something out of the romantic stories she read in secret, stories she had never believed could happen to someone like her. Before she could find her voice to respond, Kazira stepped forward, her hand shooting out to grasp Barbarius's arm. Her expression was a careful mask of concern, but there was steel in her eyes, a fierce possessiveness that she barely managed to conceal. "My sister doesn't want to dance, Your Majesty," Kazira said smoothly, her voice pitched just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "She's quite shy, I'm afraid, overwhelmed by all this grandeur. But I would be honored to share a dance with you if you'll permit me." She smiled up at him, the smile she had practiced in mirrors, the one designed to make powerful men weak. She was beautiful. Kazira knew this with absolute certainty. Beautiful in all the conventional ways that mattered. Surely he would see that, would recognize that she was the sister worth pursuing. Barbarius looked at her, his expression unreadable. A lesser man might have been swayed, might have accepted the substitution to avoid awkwardness. But he had not become Alpha King by allowing others to dictate his choices, or by accepting what was offered when it was not what he wanted. Still, there were politics to consider. alliances that could be damaged by too direct a rejection. So he inclined his head slightly, accepting Kazira's hand with careful courtesy, though his eyes remained on Thessa, searching her face for some reaction, some sign that she cared whether he danced with her sister instead. What he saw there made his wolf snarl with frustration. Thessa had stepped back, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes holding a resignation that spoke of a lifetime of being passed over, of being considered second choice, of watching others take what should have been hers. She turned away even before the music began, her movements graceful despite the pain he could sense radiating from her like heat from a dying fire. Thessa moved toward the edge of the ballroom, her vision blurred with unshed tears that she blinked away furiously. Of course he had chosen Kazira. Everyone always chose Kazira. It was the natural order of things, as inevitable as sunrise, as unchangeable as the phases of the moon. She had been foolish to feel even that momentary flutter of hope when his eyes had met hers. Foolish to think that perhaps, just once, someone might choose her first. She slipped through a side door into the garden beyond, grateful for the cool night air against her flushed cheeks, for the darkness that hid the tears she could no longer hold back. The sounds of the ball became muffled, distant, as if they came from another world entirely. Out here, among the roses and jasmine, she could breathe again. Out here, she could be alone with her disappointment without an audience to witness her weakness. Inside the ballroom, Barbarius led Kazira through the opening steps of the dance with mechanical precision. She was talking, he realized dimly, saying something about how honored she was, how she had hoped all evening for this opportunity. Her hand in his felt wrong, too warm, too eager, too calculating. She smiled up at him with practiced adoration, but there was triumph in her eyes, the look of someone who believed they had won a prize. She moved closer as they danced, pressing herself against him with a boldness that would have been scandalous had they not been in such public view. And then, perhaps emboldened by what she perceived as his interest, perhaps driven by the need to claim him before witnesses, Kazira rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss lasted perhaps 3 seconds before Barbarius gripped her shoulders and set her away from him with enough force that she stumbled backward. The music faltered, then stopped entirely as the musicians realized something was wrong. Conversations died mid-word, as hundreds of faces turned toward the scene unfolding at the center of the dance floor. Barbarius's expression was thunderous, his dark eyes blazing with an anger that made even the bravest warriors in attendance take an involuntary step back. When he spoke, his voice carried across the now silent ballroom, low and dangerous, and absolutely final. "Do not dare to touch me," he said, each word falling like a stone into still water. "You are not the one I chose. You will never be the one I choose." Kazira's face went white, then red, shame and fury warring for dominance in her expression. Around them, she could hear the whispers beginning, could feel the weight of judgment and mockery that would follow her for years after this moment. She had been rejected, publicly humiliated by the Alpha King himself. The social death of such a moment was almost worse than physical death would have been. But Barbarius was already moving, already turning away from her as if she no longer existed. His eyes scanned the ballroom, searching for white hair and a red dress, for the one who had slipped away while he had been trapped in this farce of political courtesy. When he did not find her, he strode toward the garden doors, his long legs eating up the distance, his heart pounding with an urgency he could not explain and did not question. Behind him, the ballroom erupted into frantic whispers, but he did not care. Let them talk. Let them speculate. None of it mattered if he could not find her. The garden was cool and shadowed, lit only by scattered lanterns hanging from the trees. The scent of night-blooming flowers filled the air, sweet and melancholy. Barbarius followed the stone path deeper into the manicured wilderness, his wolf senses extended, searching for her particular scent, for the trace of her presence. He found her by the fountain, sitting on the stone edge with her hands folded in her lap, staring into the dark water as if it held answers to questions she had not yet formed. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening in surprise and something else. Something that might have been hope if she had dared to let herself feel it. "You left," he said simply, stopping a few feet away from her, giving her space because he could sense how easily she might bolt if he pushed too hard, too fast. "I thought you were dancing with my sister," Thessa replied, her voice soft but steady, proud despite everything. "I didn't want to intrude on your evening." Barbarius moved closer, drawn by something he could not name and could not resist. He lowered himself to sit beside her on the fountain's edge, his large frame making the space seem smaller, more intimate. "I asked you to dance," he said, his voice gentle in a way that would have shocked those who knew him only as the fierce warrior king. "Not her. You." Thessa looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, and saw something in his face that made her breath catch. There was sincerity there, and frustration, and a longing that mirrored her own secret dreams. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why me? I'm not beautiful like Kazira. I'm not charming or clever or any of the things that men usually want. I'm just different," Barbarius finished for her. "You're different. And that's exactly what drew me to you the moment I saw you." He turned toward her more fully, his dark eyes intense in the lantern light. "Do you know how many women have approached me tonight? How many have smiled and laughed and touched my arm? All of them wanting the same thing: power, status, the prestige of being chosen by the Alpha King." His expression softened, became almost vulnerable in a way that transformed his fierce features into something achingly human. "But you looked like you wanted to disappear. Like being noticed was the last thing you desired. And that caught my attention more than all their practiced seductions ever could." Thessa felt something unfurling in her chest, something warm and terrifying and wonderful. "I've spent my whole life being told I'm not enough," she whispered, "that I'm too quiet, too strange, too different. Kazira has always been the beautiful one, the one everyone admires. I've always been just her shadow." "Then perhaps," Barbarius said, reaching out to take her hand in his much larger one, "you've been surrounded by fools who couldn't see what was right in front of them." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "There's a strength in gentleness, Thessa, a power in stillness. Your sister commands attention because she demands it. But you draw it simply by being yourself. That's far more rare, far more valuable." They sat together in the garden for hours that night, talking with the ease of old friends reunited after a long absence. Barbarius told her of the loneliness of power, of how he had built walls around himself so high that no one had bothered trying to scale them in years. Thessa spoke of growing up in Kazira's shadow, of learning to make herself small to avoid her sister's jealousy, of the dreams she kept hidden because they seemed too impossible to speak aloud. And somewhere in those hours, between one heartbeat and the next, something clicked into place. Two lonely souls recognizing each other across the darkness, seeing in the other what no one else had bothered to look for. When Barbarius finally walked her back to the ballroom as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, he did so with her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, his head bent toward hers as if she were saying the most important things he had ever heard. The few nobles still remaining at the ball stared openly, whispers already forming about what this could mean. But Thessa, for the first time in her life, did not care what anyone else thought. Because the Alpha King had chosen her. Not in spite of her differences, but because of them. And that changed everything. The days that followed were a storm of emotions and consequences that Thessa had not anticipated. News of Barbarius's interest spread through the packs like wildfire, carrying with it speculation and gossip that ranged from romantic to scandalous. Some praised the Alpha King's unexpected choice, calling it proof of his wisdom to see beauty where others were blind. Others questioned his judgment, wondering what weakness he might harbor to be drawn to someone so unremarkable. But the worst storm came from within Thessa's own family. Kazira had returned from the ball in a state of barely controlled fury, her humiliation burning like acid in her veins. She had locked herself in her chambers for 2 days, refusing food and visitors, nursing her wounded pride in private. But on the 3rd day, when news reached her that Barbarius had sent gifts to Thessa, when she learned that the Alpha King was actively courting her pallid, mousy sister, something inside Kazira snapped. She found Thessa in the gardens, tending to the roses that had always been her sanctuary. The afternoon sun was warm, birds sang in the trees, and for a brief moment, Thessa had allowed herself to feel happy, truly happy, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "How dare you!" Kazira's voice cut through the peaceful scene like a blade. Thessa turned to find her sister striding toward her, still beautiful, but with something wild and dangerous in her eyes. She straightened slowly, her hands still holding the pruning shears, her heart beginning to race with an old, familiar fear. "Kazira, how dare you steal what should have been mine?" Kazira's voice rose with each word, losing the careful control she usually maintained. That night was supposed to be my triumph. The Alpha King was supposed to choose me. Everyone expected it. Everyone knew it. And you ruined everything. Thessa felt anger rising in her own chest, a rare emotion that she usually suppressed but could no longer contain. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "He chose me, of his own free will. That's not theft, Kazira. That's just not you being chosen for once." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. Thessa had never spoken to her sister this way, had never dared to voice the resentment that had built up over years of being diminished and dismissed. Kazira's face contorted with rage. "You think you deserve him? You with your ghost-white hair and your pathetic shyness. You're nothing, Thessa. You've always been nothing. A pale copy of a real woman, an embarrassment to our family." "Then why do you care so much?" Thessa shot back, finding courage she did not know she possessed. "If I'm so pathetic, so unremarkable, why does it bother you so much that he chose me?" The question landed like a blow, and for a moment, Kazira's mask cracked completely. What showed beneath was not just anger, but something raw and painful and long buried. "Because it should have been me," she whispered, and for the first time, there were tears in her eyes. "Everything has always come so easily to me. Beauty, admiration, the attention of every male who mattered. That was supposed to be my life, my destiny. And then you who never tried. You who never competed. You just stand there being yourself and he chooses you. Do you know what that feels like? To realize that everything I've built, everything I've become, matters less than your authenticity?" The confession hung between them, ugly and honest. And in that moment, Thessa understood. Kazira's cruelty had never been about Thessa's inadequacy. It had been about her own fear that her carefully constructed perfection might be hollow, might be worthless compared to something real. "I never wanted to compete with you," Thessa said softly. "I just wanted you to love me as a sister." "Well, I can't," Kazira replied, her voice hardening again as she rebuilt her walls. "I can't look at you without seeing everything I worked so hard to become rendered meaningless. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to leave. I've already received an offer from Alpha King Mordrin of the Northern Reaches. He's powerful, wealthy, and he wants me. And I'm going to marry him and build my own kingdom far from here, far from you and your unexpected fairy tale." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. But know this, little sister. What you have with Barbarius won't last. Men like him get bored. They move on. And when he does, when he realizes that you're not enough to hold his interest, you'll have nothing. No sister, no family, no one. Because I'll make sure that everyone knows it was your fault our relationship ended. That you were the one who drove me away with your jealousy and your theft. With that, Kazira turned and strode away, her blue dress billowing behind her like storm clouds. Thessa watched her go, feeling the complex tangle of relief and grief that came with losing someone who had been both family and tormentor. Part of her wanted to call out, to try one more time to bridge the chasm between them. But she knew it was useless. Some wounds went too deep to heal. That evening, when Barbarius came to call on her as had become his custom, he found Thessa in the same garden, staring at the roses without really seeing them. He moved to her side silently, his large presence somehow comforting rather than overwhelming. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle, and Thessa marveled again at how this man who was rumored to be brutal in battle, who ruled with an iron fist and commanded armies, could speak to her with such tenderness. She told him everything, the words spilling out in a rush. The confrontation with Kazira, the painful confessions, the threats, and the departure. She expected him to be angry, to view this family drama as beneath his concern, or perhaps as a warning sign about the complications that came with choosing her. Instead, Barbarius listened with complete attention, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said. "Family wounds cut the deepest. But I want you to understand something, Thessa. Your sister's inability to see your worth, her need to diminish you to feel secure in herself, that says everything about her and nothing about you." He cupped her face in his large hands, tilting her head up so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "I chose you because of who you are. Not your family, not your status, not what you could give me politically. You, Thessa. Your kindness, your strength, the way you see beauty in simple things, the way you listen when others talk, the way you care about things that matter beyond yourself. That's what drew me. That's what will always draw me." Thessa felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were different from the tears she had shed so many times before. These were tears of relief, of being seen, of being valued for exactly who she was. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper. "Scared that Kazira might be right, that I won't be enough for you, that you'll wake up one day and wonder why you chose the strange girl with white hair instead of someone worthy of your position." Barbarius's expression grew fierce, protective, the warrior king showing through. "Then let me make something very clear," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You are worthy, not because of anything you need to prove or earn, but simply because you exist. And anyone who tries to make you believe otherwise will answer to me, including you." He pulled her into his arms then, and Thessa allowed herself to be held, to feel safe in a way she never had before. Against his chest, she could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, an anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Kazira said what we have won't last," she murmured against his shirt. She felt him smile. "Then we'll prove her wrong, every day, for the rest of our lives if necessary. We'll prove her wrong." And he was right. In the weeks and months that followed, what had begun as an unexpected connection deepened into something profound and unshakable. Barbarius courted Thessa with a patience and devotion that surprised the court. He brought her books because he learned she loved to read. He took her on long walks through the forest because she felt most at peace among the trees. He asked her opinions on matters of state and actually listened to her answers, sometimes implementing her suggestions to the shock of his advisors. But more than the grand gestures, it was the small moments that revealed the truth of their bond. The way he would seek her out after difficult days, needing nothing more than to sit quietly in her presence. The way she would touch his hand when he grew too tense during council meetings, her gentleness grounding him. The way they could communicate entire conversations with just a look across a crowded room. To the world, Barbarius remained the fierce Alpha King, the warrior whose very name struck fear into his enemies. He was ruthless in battle, uncompromising in his demands for loyalty, capable of brutal decisions when necessary to protect his pack. Stories of his ferocity spread far and wide, and none who challenged him lived to regret it. But with Thessa, he was someone else entirely. With her, the iron edges softened into something warm and protective. His large hands, which could snap a man's neck without effort, held her as if she were made of spun glass. His voice, which could command armies, spoke to her in gentle tones that made her feel cherished. He was devoted to her in a way that was almost reverential, as if he understood that she was the one piece of softness in his harsh world, and he would protect that softness with everything he had. The duality fascinated those who witnessed it. The same man who executed traitors without hesitation would spend hours braiding wildflowers into Thessa's hair. The king who negotiated brutal political alliances with cold pragmatism would read poetry to her in the gardens at sunset. It was as if he had divided himself into two people, the merciless ruler the world needed, and the devoted partner that Thessa deserved. 4 months after the ball that had changed both their lives, Thessa woke feeling strange. A subtle nausea, a heightened sensitivity to smells, a fatigue that seemed to come from nowhere. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to the stress of her new position as the Alpha King's chosen mate, the weight of court life that she was still learning to navigate. But when the symptoms persisted, when she found herself emotional over small things and craving foods she had never particularly liked before, a suspicion began to form. She went to the pack healer in secret, not wanting to raise hopes, not even sure she dared hope herself. When the healer confirmed what she had barely allowed herself to believe, Thessa sat in stunned silence for a long moment. She was pregnant. She was going to have Barbarius's child. The knowledge was overwhelming, terrifying, and absolutely wonderful all at once. She waited until that evening to tell him, when they were alone in his chambers, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Barbarius was reviewing documents from the day's council meeting, his brow furrowed in concentration. Thessa watched him for a moment, memorizing the way he looked in this moment before everything changed. "Barbarius," she said softly, and something in her tone made him immediately set aside his work and give her his full attention. "What is it?" he asked, concern flickering across his face. "Are you unwell? You've seemed tired lately." Thessa smiled, a smile that was tremulous and radiant all at once. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. "We're going to have a child." For a long moment, Barbarius simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a speed that belied his size, he crossed the room and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around as laughter, pure and joyful, burst from his chest. "A child," he breathed, setting her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach as if he could somehow feel the life growing there. "Our child." Tears streamed down his face, shocking Thessa with their abundance. She had seen him tender, had seen him gentle, but she had never seen him cry. He cupped her face in his hands, his own wet with tears he made no effort to hide. "You have given me everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I didn't even know I was missing. And now this? How did I ever deserve you?" "You chose me," Thessa replied, her own tears falling freely. "When no one else would. When even I didn't believe I was worth choosing. You saw me, really saw me, and you chose me. That's how." The pregnancy was announced to the court the following week, and the celebrations that followed, were unprecedented. The Alpha King's heir was on the way, the continuation of the bloodline assured. Gifts poured in from allied packs, congratulations from far and wide. Even those who had initially questioned Barbarius's choice of mate now saw it as proof of destiny, as if the gods themselves had guided his hand that night at the ball. But not everyone celebrated. In the northern reaches, Khazira heard the news from her new husband, Alpha King Mordrin. She had married him 3 months earlier, in a ceremony that was grand and politically significant, but utterly devoid of the emotion she had witnessed between Thessa and Barbarius. Mordrin was powerful and wealthy, as she had said, but he was also cold, calculating, and interested in her primarily for her beauty and the alliance her family name brought. When she learned of Thessa's pregnancy, something inside Khazira withered completely. Her sister, the one she had spent a lifetime belittling and dismissing, was carrying the child of the man Khazira had wanted more than anything. Her sister would be a mother, would be loved and cherished and protected, while Khazira sat in a cold castle beside a man who viewed her as a possession rather than a partner. The jealousy that consumed her in that moment was total and absolute. It burned away any remaining possibility of reconciliation, any chance that the sisters might someday find their way back to each other. Khazira closed her heart completely, locked away any softness that remained, and threw herself into her new role with bitter determination. If she could not have love, she would have power. If she could not have genuine affection, she would settle for fear and respect. She never sent congratulations, never reached out. The silence between the sisters became permanent, a chasm too wide to cross. The months of Thessa's pregnancy were among the happiest of her life. Barbarius was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly concerned for her comfort and well-being. He rearranged his entire schedule to ensure he could spend time with her each day. He attended every healer's appointment, asked endless questions about her health, and generally behaved like a man who had discovered the most precious treasure in the world and was terrified of losing it. The court found his devotion both touching and slightly absurd. Here was their fierce king, who could stare down enemies without blinking, completely undone by his pregnant mate. He ordered the finest craftsmen to create a nursery fit for royalty. He consulted with healers from across the realm to ensure Thessa received the best possible care. He even learned to knit, of all things, determined to make something with his own hands for their child. Thessa watched all of this with a mixture of amusement and deep, abiding love. She had never imagined being loved like this, being cherished with such wholehearted devotion. Every day felt like a gift. Every moment with Barbarius a confirmation that she had not been foolish to believe in their connection that night in the garden. When her labor began on a clear spring morning, Barbarius nearly drove the healers mad with his anxiety. He paced outside the birthing chamber like a caged wolf, snarling at anyone who suggested he might want to rest or occupy himself elsewhere. When Thessa called for him, he burst through the door so fast he nearly took it off its hinges, and he remained at her side throughout, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, his own face nearly as pale as hers from worry. Vendrell came into the world screaming his displeasure at the transition, healthy and strong and absolutely perfect. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's pale skin, a beautiful blending of both parents that made him unique even among a people accustomed to diversity. Barbarius held his son for the first time with hands that trembled, this man who had never trembled before any enemy, and wept openly as Vendrell's tiny fingers wrapped around one of his own. "He's perfect," he whispered, looking at Thessa with such love and gratitude that it took her breath away. "You're both perfect." Thessa smiled, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "We did it," she said softly. "We built something real, something lasting, from a night when I thought I had lost everything." Barbarius moved to sit beside her on the bed, carefully arranging their son between them so they could both see his small face. "Do you remember what your sister said? That what we had wouldn't last?" Thessa nodded, the memory of that painful conversation suddenly feeling very distant and very small, compared to the reality of their life now. She was wrong, Barbarius said firmly. This, what we have, it's unshakable. It began with humiliation and rejection, grew despite jealousy and doubt, and flourished because we chose each other every single day. That kind of love doesn't fade, Thessa. It only grows stronger. And he was right. The early days of parenthood tested them in ways neither had anticipated. Vendrail was a demanding infant, prone to waking through the night with cries that echoed through the castle chambers. Thessa, despite her exhaustion, found a fierce protective love she had never known she possessed. She would pace the nursery floor for hours, singing lullabies in a voice soft as falling snow, her white hair unbound and flowing over her shoulders as she cradled her son against her heart. Barbarius, the fearsome alpha king who had never changed his schedule for anyone, rearranged his entire life around his family. He learned to function on little sleep, attending council meetings with shadows under his eyes, but a smile playing at his lips whenever someone mentioned his son. His advisors were scandalized when he began bringing Vendrail to important gatherings, the infant secured against his father's broad chest in a sling that Thessa had made. But Barbarius simply stared them down with those dark, penetrating eyes until they learned to accept this new reality. The first time Vendrail smiled, a genuine expression of joy that lit up his small face, both parents wept. The first time he laughed, a sound like bells chiming, Barbarius canceled an entire day of meetings to spend playing with his son, making silly faces and sounds until Thessa collapsed beside them, laughing so hard her sides ached. As Vendrail grew from infant to toddler, his personality began to emerge. He was curious and fearless, often giving his parents heart-stopping moments as he attempted to climb things far too tall for his small frame, or wandered into places he should not go. But he was also remarkably kind, sharing his toys without prompting, gentle with the castle animals, always concerned when someone seemed sad. Thessa saw both herself and Barbarius in their son. He had inherited his father's strength and natural authority, the way people instinctively listened when he spoke even as a small child. But he also carried his mother's empathy, her ability to sense the emotions of others, her preference for thoughtfulness over impulsive action. One afternoon, when Vendrail was 3 years old, Thessa found him in the garden, carefully tending to a bird with a broken wing. He looked up at her with eyes that were a perfect blend of his parents' coloring, gray with flecks of deep brown, and said with complete seriousness, "Mama, he's hurt. We have to help him." They spent the next week nursing the bird back to health, Barbarius fashioning a small splint with surprising delicacy for such large hands, Thessa teaching Vendrail how to feed the creature without frightening it. When the bird finally flew away, healed and strong, Vendrail cried, but they were tears of joy mixed with sadness, the complex emotions of someone who understood both loss and the importance of freedom. "You did a good thing," Barbarius told his son, kneeling to be at eye level with him. "You helped something vulnerable when it needed help. That's what true strength is, Vendrail. Not the ability to hurt, but the choice to protect." Thessa watched them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was the family she had never dared dream of having, this love that surrounded her like a warm blanket, constant and reassuring and real. But even in their happiness, shadows lingered. News would occasionally reach them from the northern reaches, updates about Khazira's life that arrived through the complex network of pack politics and trade relations. Each piece of information was a small knife wound that Thessa tried to ignore, but could never quite forget. Khazira had given birth to twin daughters shortly after Vendrail was born. Then 2 more children followed in quick succession. The report said she ruled beside Alpha King Mordrin with iron efficiency, that she had become a formidable political operator, respected and feared in equal measure. But those same reports, when read between the lines, painted a picture of a woman who had achieved everything except happiness. There were whispers of Mordrin's infidelities, of Khazira's increasingly bitter temperament, of children raised more by servants than parents. There were rumors that she had become obsessed with expanding her influence, with proving herself more powerful than anyone who had ever dismissed her, with building an empire that would eclipse even Barbarius's kingdom. One evening, as Thessa nursed their second child, a daughter they had named Lyanna. Barbarius asked her if she ever thought about reaching out to Kazira. Thessa was quiet for a long moment, looking down at their daughter's small face, so peaceful in sleep. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder if enough time has passed. If maybe she's changed, softened. If she looks at her own children and thinks about what she lost when she cut me out of her life." "But," Barbarius prompted gently. "But then I remember that day in the garden, the things she said, the hatred in her eyes. And I realized that reaching out would only invite more pain." Thessa looked up at him, her gray eyes luminous with unshed tears. "Some wounds are too deep to heal, some bridges too burned to rebuild. I've accepted that our relationship is one of them. It hurts, and it probably always will hurt a little. But I can't keep hoping for something that will never be." Barbarius moved to sit beside her, wrapping his arm around both his wife and daughter. "She doesn't know what she's missing," he said softly. The quiet moments, the genuine love, the family built on truth rather than ambition. She traded all of this for power and prestige, and I suspect she knows exactly what a poor bargain she made." As their children grew, the contrast between the two families became even more apparent. Vendrail and Lyanna were raised with love as the foundation of their existence. Yes, they were taught their duties as royal children, were given the finest education, were trained in combat and politics, and all the skills they would need to navigate their world. But above all, they were taught that their worth was not contingent on achievement or appearance, or the approval of others. Thessa made sure of that. Having spent her childhood believing she was less than, she was determined that her children would never doubt their value. She told them stories not just of great warriors and cunning strategists, but of kind people who changed the world through gentleness, of beauty found in unexpected places, of strength that came from vulnerability. Barbarius, meanwhile, taught them balance. He showed them how to be fierce when necessary, how to stand firm against injustice, how to protect those weaker than themselves. But he also demonstrated through his own actions that true power came from knowing when to be hard and when to be soft, when to fight and when to yield, when to command and when to listen. The children adored both their parents, but the bond between father and children was particularly special to witness. This man who terrified hardened warriors would spend hours on the floor playing make-believe with his children, his deep voice adopting ridiculous accents for the characters they created. He would braid Lyanna's hair with surprising skill, his large fingers gentle as they wove intricate patterns. He would spar with Vendrail in the training yard, teaching him not just how to fight, but why honor mattered more than victory. And every night, without fail, he would go to each child's room and tell them he loved them, that he was proud of them, that they were perfect exactly as they were. Thessa would often watch from the doorway, her heart aching with the beauty of it, with the knowledge that their children would never question whether they were loved, would never lie awake wondering if they were enough. When Vendrail was 7 and Lyanna was 4, a delegation arrived from the northern reaches. It was a trade mission, officially, but everyone knew it was also an opportunity for Mordrin to size up Barbarius's kingdom, to gauge whether he might be a useful ally or a potential threat. Kazira came with the delegation. The news reached Thessa while she was in the library with Lyanna, reading stories about brave queens and clever foxes. Her hands stilled on the pages, her breath catching in her throat. After 8 years of silence, of parallel lives running on separate tracks, her sister was coming here. "Mama?" Lyanna's small voice broke through her shock. "Are you all right?" Thessa looked down at her daughter, at those eyes that missed nothing, and managed to smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just surprised by something. Should we finish this story?" But her mind was racing. Why was Kazira coming? Was this an attempt at reconciliation? A calculated political move? Simply unavoidable given her husband's mission? And more importantly, how did Thessa feel about seeing her sister again after all this time? She found Barbarius in the training yard, working through sword forms with Vendrail. Father and son moved in synchronized grace, their movements a deadly dance that was somehow also beautiful. Barbarius spotted her immediately, reading the tension in her posture even from a distance. He called a halt to the training and approached her, Vendrail trailing behind with the perceptiveness that made him seem older than his years. "The delegation from the northern reaches," Thessa said without preamble. "Khazira is with them." Barbarius's expression hardened, but not with anger, with protectiveness. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked. "We can refuse to receive her privately if you prefer. Keep all interactions strictly formal and public." Thessa considered this, weighing her options. Part of her wanted exactly that, wanted to hide behind protocol and maintain her distance. But another part, the part that still remembered the sister Khazira had been before jealousy poisoned everything, wanted to at least try to speak with her. If only to find closure, to put to rest the ghost of their relationship once and for all. "I'll see her," Thessa decided. "Privately, at least once. I need to know if there's any possibility of peace between us, or if we're truly done forever." "I'll be nearby," Barbarius said firmly. "If she says one word out of line, if she makes you uncomfortable in any way, I'll end the meeting immediately." "Papa, who is Khazira?" Vendrail asked, his young face curious but also concerned, as if he could sense the emotional weight of the conversation. Thessa knelt beside her son, brushing his dark hair back from his face. "She's my sister," she said gently. "Your aunt. But we had a fight a long time ago, before you were born, and we haven't spoken since. Are you going to make up?" Vendrail's question was so innocent, so hopeful, and it broke Thessa's heart a little. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Sometimes when people hurt each other badly enough, it's very hard to fix what's broken. But I'm going to try to talk with her, and we'll see what happens." The northern delegation arrived 3 days later with all the pomp and ceremony befitting their status. Mordrin was a tall, cold-eyed man who reminded Thessa unpleasantly of a snake, all calculated movements and false smiles. He greeted Barbarius with the appropriate respect, but there was an undercurrent of challenge in his posture, as if he constantly measured himself against the Alpha King and found the comparison wanting. And beside him stood Khazira. 8 years had changed her. She was still beautiful, her golden hair now styled in an elaborate updo that spoke of wealth and status, her blue dress even more luxurious than the one she had worn to that fateful ball. But there was a hardness to her features that had not been there before, lines around her mouth that suggested bitterness rather than laughter, and her eyes, when they met Thessa's across the throne room, were cold and assessing. The formal reception was tense but polite. Pleasantries were exchanged, gifts presented, the usual political theater performed for the benefit of both courts. Thessa stood beside Barbarius on the dais, her hand resting lightly on his arm, acutely aware of Khazira's gaze tracking her every movement. When the formalities concluded, Khazira approached her with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Sister," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's been a long time." "It has," Thessa agreed, matching her tone. "Would you care to walk in the gardens? We could speak privately." For a moment, Khazira's mask slipped, and something raw showed through. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe hope, quickly hidden behind practiced indifference. "That would be acceptable," she said. Barbarius leaned close to Thessa as they passed, his voice too low for others to hear. "I'll be in the study overlooking the rose garden. If you need me, just call." The gardens were in full spring bloom, explosions of color and scent that usually brought Thessa peace. But today, walking beside her estranged sister in stiff silence, she felt only tension. They walked for several minutes without speaking, the air between them heavy with years of unresolved conflict. Finally, Khazira broke the silence. "Your children are beautiful," she said, and there was something in her voice that might have been genuine. The boy looks like Barbarius, but he has your gentleness. I saw him helping a servant who had dropped some linens. He didn't have to, but he did. Vendrail has a good heart, Thessa replied carefully. We're very proud of him, and Lyanna is fierce and kind in equal measure. They're both wonderful. I have 4, Khazira said abruptly. Twin girls, then a boy, then another girl. They're well-behaved, accomplished. The twins already read and write 3 languages. My son is being trained in combat by the best warriors in our pack. There was something desperate in the way she listed these achievements, as if she needed to prove something. Thessa felt a pang of sadness for her sister, for the woman who measured worth in accomplishments rather than in moments of simple joy. I'm sure they're remarkable, Thessa said gently. Do they make you happy? The question seemed to startle Khazira. She stopped walking, her back very straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Happy, she repeated, as if the word were foreign. They're my children. They fulfill their duties. They bring honor to our family name. But do they make you happy? Thessa pressed. Do you laugh with them? Play with them? Do you know what makes each of them unique? What they dream about? What they fear? Khazira's carefully maintained composure cracked. Not everyone can have what you have, she said, her voice sharp. Not everyone gets the fairy tale romance, the devoted husband, the perfect family. Some of us have to settle for power and respect instead of love. You didn't have to settle, Thessa replied, her own frustration rising. You chose this, Khazira. You chose pride over family, ambition over connection. You could have stayed, could have worked through your jealousy, could have been part of Vendrail and Lyanna's lives, but instead you ran away and married a man you don't love to prove some point that no one cared about except you. You don't understand. Khazira's voice broke, and for the first time since they had begun this conversation, Thessa saw genuine emotion in her sister's eyes. Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life being told you're exceptional, only to discover that exceptional isn't enough? I was beautiful, talented, everything a future Luna should be. And then you, quiet, strange, different you, were chosen over me by the most powerful man in our world. Do you have any idea how that felt? It felt like being seen for the first time in my life, Thessa shot back. It felt like someone finally looked past all the things that made me different and saw value instead of oddity. And yes, I understand that it hurt you, but your pain didn't give you the right to be cruel. Didn't justify cutting me out of your life. Didn't excuse the years of silence and absence. Khazira sank onto a nearby bench, her perfect posture finally collapsing. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. I thought time would make it hurt less, she whispered. I thought if I built my own kingdom, my own power, I could forget how much I lost when I lost you. But it hasn't worked. I look at my children and wonder what kind of aunt you would have been to them. I achieve victories in council and have no one to share them with who would genuinely care. I lie beside my husband at night and remember how you and Barbarius look at each other, and I know I will never have that. Thessa felt tears burning in her eyes. This was the sister she remembered, the one who existed beneath the bitterness and pride. Then why didn't you reach out? She asked. Why didn't you try to fix this? Because I didn't know how, Khazira admitted. Because I said such terrible things, hurt you so badly. Because I was ashamed of who I had become and couldn't figure out how to be anyone else. Because every year that passed made it harder to imagine a way back. The silence that followed was different from before, less hostile, more sad. 2 sisters separated by their own choices, by wounds that had festered too long, sitting in a garden and acknowledging the truth of what they had lost. I don't know if we can fix this, Thessa said finally. Too much time has passed. Too much has been said and done. But maybe we don't have to be enemies. Maybe we can be something in between. Not close, not like we might have been, but not completely estranged either. Kazira looked up at her, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. What does that look like? I don't know, Thessa admitted. Letters, perhaps. Occasional visits. Letting our children know each other, even if we can't quite manage to know each other anymore. It's not much, but it's more than nothing. For a long moment, Kazira said nothing. Then slowly, she nodded. I would like that, she said quietly. It's more than I deserve, but I would like that very much. They parted that day with a fragile truce between them, not reconciled, but no longer actively hostile. It was not the happy ending of sisterly love renewed, but it was honest, and perhaps honesty was more valuable than false warmth. Over the years that followed, they did exchange letters, stiff at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Kazira never visited again, and Thessa did not travel to the northern reaches, but their children eventually met at various pack gatherings and developed their own relationships, untainted by their mother's complicated history. And slowly, painfully, Thessa made peace with the fact that some things could not be fully healed, only accepted. She had lost the sister she might have had, but she had gained a life richer than anything she had ever imagined, and perhaps that was the real lesson, that sometimes letting go of what was lost was the only way to fully appreciate what remained. Years continued to pass, measured in seasons and celebrations, in children growing and kingdoms prospering. Vendrail and Lyanna were joined by 2 more siblings, another boy and another girl, and the castle rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet. Barbarius, despite his fearsome reputation, was regularly found on the floor covered in children, telling stories or playing games, or simply being present in the way that meant everything. Kazira remained in the northern reaches, her life running on a parallel track that never again intersected with Thessa's. She had more children, built her own power base, became known as a formidable political force in her own right, but those who knew her well said there was a coldness to her, a hardness that had not been there in her youth. She had chosen pride over love, ambition over family, and the consequences of that choice marked her forever. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the moon was full and the world seemed painted in silver, Thessa would think of her sister. She would wonder what might have been different if Kazira had chosen kindness over jealousy, if she had been able to celebrate her sister's happiness rather than resent it. But she no longer carried the weight of that loss as grief. It had transmuted over time into something else. Acceptance, perhaps, or simply the recognition that some relationships are meant to end so that others can flourish. And flourish they did. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful ball, Barbarius took Thessa back to the same ballroom where they had first met. He had arranged for it to be empty, except for the 2 of them, lit only by candles that cast the same golden glow she remembered from that night. "Dance with me," he said, extending his hand exactly as he had a decade before. Thessa took it, smiling at the echo of their beginning. They moved together across the empty floor, older now, changed by time and experience, but still fundamentally the same 2 people who had recognized something vital in each other across a crowded room. "Do you ever regret it?" Thessa asked as they danced. "Choosing me that night? I know I wasn't what anyone expected." Barbarius pulled her closer, his arms strong and sure around her. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You want to know what I regret? I regret every moment before that night when I didn't know you existed. I regret the years I spent alone, thinking that was my fate. But choosing you, loving you, building this life with you, those are the only truly perfect choices I've ever made." He stopped dancing, holding her still in the center of the ballroom. "That night, your sister said they thought you were ugly, that you were just a shadow, and I looked at you and saw starlight. I saw strength disguised as gentleness, beauty in your difference, worth that no one else had bothered to recognize. and every day since then has proven me right. You are extraordinary, Thessa, not despite who you are, but because of it. Thessa kissed him then, there in the empty ballroom where their story had begun, and tasted salt from tears she wasn't sure were his or hers or both. Some love stories begin with grand gestures and immediate recognition. Others start small and grow slowly over time. But theirs had begun with rejection and humiliation, with a moment of being truly seen for the first time, and had grown into something unbreakable precisely because it had been tested from the very start. Kazira had been wrong about so many things. Wrong about what made someone worthy of love. Wrong about the staying power of genuine connection. Wrong about her sister's capacity to be loved exactly as she was. But most of all, she had been wrong about shadows. Because Thessa had never been a shadow at all. She had been a light, waiting for the right person to see her shine. And when Barbarius had looked across that ballroom and seen past the surface to the truth beneath, he had changed both their lives forever. Their son grew to be a great leader, carrying forward the legacy of a love that began in the most unlikely way. He ruled with his father's strength and his mother's wisdom, and he never forgot the story of how his parents met, how his mother had been dismissed and belittled until the right person saw her worth. And in the years that followed, that story became legend. The tale of the Alpha King, who looked past conventional beauty to find something real. The story of the girl in the red dress who dared to believe she might be worthy of love. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with someone simply choosing to see what everyone else has overlooked. Barbarius and Thessa lived long lives filled with purpose and meaning, surrounded by family and pack, their bond never weakening even as their bodies aged. When they finally passed, many years later, they went together, as if even death could not separate what had been so perfectly joined. And the last words anyone heard Barbarius speak were whispered to his wife in the quiet of their final moments together. "I would choose you again," he said. "In every lifetime, in every universe, in every possible world. I would always choose you." "I know," Thessa whispered back, her hand in his as it had been so many times before. "Because you see me. You always have." And in that moment, as their hands remained clasped and their story came to its natural close, there was a sense of perfect completion. What had begun with cruelty and rejection had become something beautiful and lasting. What had started with one person seeing another, truly for the first time, had grown into a love that would be remembered and celebrated for generations. Some called it fate, others called it chance. But those who knew them best understood that it was simply the inevitable result of two people brave enough to be authentic in a world that constantly demanded pretense. Two souls recognizing each other across the darkness and choosing, every single day, to hold on tight and never let go. The ballroom where they first met stood for centuries after, a monument to unlikely beginnings and perfect endings. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the candles were lit just right, people swore they could see two figures dancing in the empty space, a tall, dark-haired man and a woman with hair like starlight, moving together with the ease of long practice and the joy of eternal love. They thought she was ugly. They thought she was a shadow. They were all wrong. She was a queen. She was a mother. She was beloved. And she was, and always had been, exactly enough. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.